I want to turn and talk about something I listened to over the weekend, kind of wrapped it up this morning. And this ties back to the impeachment. And, I've been commenting a lot on the impeachment. We've had many show segments about the impeachment as a continuation of the coup that started inside the FBI and DOJ. And that's exactly what it is. It is the continuation of the coup. But there are particular things that I read about and learned about that I want to pass along to you because they explain not only why this impeachment is happening, but what was happening, this impeachment effort based on this truly innocuous, almost irrelevant call between President Trump and President Zelensky of the Ukraine, but why that sparked this impeachment fervor, why the left is hysterically determined to hide from the American people the identity of the whistleblower, got the whole thing started. And to be clear, everyone knows who the whistleblower was, Eric Ciaramella. Everybody knows it. It's been all over the place. The left is trying to keep it out of the mainstream airwaves. But I'm going to say it, and it matters that you understand, because it's key to understanding what is driving the left's determination and this fervor to impeach President Trump. Backing up, we mentioned the ambassador having testified last week, Yovanovitch, and she was claiming she was very, very hurt and offended and outraged and upset and just so, just kind of beside herself that her loyalty was questioned in the phone call between Trump and Zelensky. Now, you might remember that Zelensky and Trump both in this conversation viewed the ambassador, she was by then the previous ambassador, but the previous ambassador under Obama, she'd been appointed by Obama in 2016, and she's been over there as Ukrainian ambassador, and she was in this conversation between Trump and Zelensky, criticized by both of them, kind of part of and I think the term was the bad guys or the people doing bad things. Well, what I learned about over the weekend, I want to share with you and actually urge you to go listen to it yourself. And that is a very lengthy, it's actually 2 hours long, didn't need to be that long, but a 2-hour video prepared by Glenn Beck. It's a video that's called, I think, like the Democrat Hydra, Hydra. It's the many-headed snake. But what he uncovered, and we've talked about bits and pieces of this in the past. We've talked about George Soros in the past on the show and the many ways in which he is using his seemingly endless, endless bucket of money, his billions and billions and billions and billions to shape the world in his image. But part of the story related to the Ukraine goes back to the reality that this effort that the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, NGOs created by, not just by Soros, but started by Soros and other ones kind of proliferating out, other little subset organizations. These NGOs carry out the mission of the George Soros, the big Open Society Foundation, which is, to start with, the absolute destruction of freedom in the world. Complete destruction of the idea of America, of a country founded on Judeo-Christian values, a country founded on the inherent right to live in freedom. George Soros is a very determined atheist. He views any reference to God as just offensive, and he's also a radical socialist. He wants very much to bring the world, as leftists always do, as socialists always do, their mission is to bring the people, the masses, into submission to the government, into submission to those in charge. He wants to be in charge by bringing the masses into submission and then orchestrating who runs countries. So part of the effort he does, that this is George Soros, part of the effort he has done for decades is to intentionally instigate tumult, to intentionally stir up people in countries all over the world to lead to uprisings that appear to the media, who are not particularly tuned in, not particularly aware. The media, they seem like, and they're characterized as indigenous, organic. Just all of a sudden, people are upset. You think, wow, people, they must really be upset because look at all these people protesting. And we have been deluded into thinking that these protests were truly organic. It is in part the tiny example in America, Occupy Wall Street. The country was doing great, is doing great, but Occupy Wall Street emerged. And this was not organic. It was not a bunch of really patriotic Americans sitting around and recognizing things that had to change. This is the result of intentional funded agitation by George Soros. to get people stirred up. And I know people like this who would watch these protests in America, Occupy Wall Street. Now it's Antifa. They watch these and they think, wow, America must be a terrible country, because why would all these otherwise sane people be wound up? There must be things I don't understand. I must be missing the boat. I must not really realize, how really terrible America is. And here I thought it was a great country. So understanding that this is a Soros mindset, he does this all over the world. He creates organizations and movements. He puts people on the ground. He trains them to stir up agitation, to be angry, to be agitated, to spread agitation, to encourage others to be agitated. So this is a Soros mission. Once he has the country in tumult, and he's in the middle of it, and his people are in the middle of it, and his organization's in the middle of it, all the tumult often results in the overthrow of the government. His mission then to understand why he wanted to have what he was doing in the Ukraine was, and many countries around the world is, once the agitation starts, he wants to be the one to orchestrate who gets put into power. He is bringing about his, open society worldview, George Soros, socialist rule of this world, all under the guise of happy sounding, friendly sounding terms. And people think, they watch it from the outside and they just can hardly believe. They think, wow, I guess I didn't understand the history very well of the Ukraine, because look at all this protest. So the George Soros mission, and I'm getting around to the Ukraine, and I'm getting around to the impeachment, so hang in there. But what George Soros has been doing around the world is, step one, identify, train, and fund people, civil society groups to mobilize. This is a Soros term. He's trying to bring out civil society, the most uncivilized society possible, but he chooses a term everybody likes. And then and this is where the Americans come in. So in the Ukraine, we had our State Department money, which, to understand, is your money, your tax dollars. State Department money funneled to help the George Soros NGO agitators stir up agitation inside the Ukraine. So our tax dollars are going to George Soros NGOs, not just in the Ukraine, but all over the world, to stir up agitation and hatred against our government, to bring about this toppling of government. So in the Ukraine, under President Obama, when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, and even after she was done with that job, she has spoken about a great program they had in place to help train people in these countries to understand social media, use of social media, how you can, and so it sounds like such a great thing. Oh, great, you're bringing the internet to the masses. This is wonderful. They'll have access to, information. It was a very intentional, agitating, intending to create agitation effort, and the American government, our government, was funding this in the Ukraine and other places. This ambassador, who's now, just taken aback, and she described, I was so shocked. The color drained from my face. I couldn't believe that President Trump said something so mean about me. She's been in the middle of this. She's part of the effort in the Ukraine to get money from the State Department to the agitators. And so this is what President Trump was apparently referring to in his conversation with President Zelensky, who's not part of the Ukrainian government that was in existence then. He's not part of the cabal that was actually assisting in this whole, he wasn't involved, Zelensky was not, in what was happening in 2016. So you had all this agitation happening inside the Ukraine, funded by the American government, which is the NGO created by Soros' intent to destroy the nation, to destroy the government, to destroy the culture and society, is to lead people into agitation. So the State Department leaps into place. They train activists so they're ready when they've got something they can get people protesting about. They've got them using social media, orchestrating on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, orchestrating all of this corruption. And then the State Department, bringing in their proxies, is actively supporting this opposition. And finally, when it all gets going, the idea is once they've toppled the government, they put in people they want. All of this was happening in the Ukraine. And the ambassador, well aware of it, seeming to be facilitating it, helping with it. And there are now, and there was actually another piece I'll talk about in just a moment, but there are now emails that came to light through a Freedom of Information Act showing that the alleged whistleblower that everyone knows the name of, except, somehow the Democrats in Washington think they're keeping it secret by not allowing it to be said during these impeachment proceedings. But the alleged whistleblower, Eric Ciaramella, was getting updates on George Soros' personal Ukraine activities. Ciaramella, the whistleblower, outraged by a conversation between Trump and Zelensky, he was getting emails all along, long before the famous phone call in July of this year, long before there was any reason to be concerned that Trump would even win. This guy's in the middle of it with the Soros people. And so there are a whole cast of list of characters connected with a Ukraine desk in the State Department and within the National Security Council who were either aware of, complicit, and in some ways even fomenting or agitating, but certainly vaguely aware of and not doing a darn thing about it, all of what was happening using State Department money, your tax dollars, inside the Ukraine to stir up agitation. This is what was happening in the Ukraine. This explains why Adam Schiff, who is perfectly aware of all of this, I'm going to, I would bet, he hasn't personally called me and told me that, but I'm telling you, this is why Schiff is so hysterical, because blowing open not just that this ambassador was agitating against President Trump, for whom she's supposed to be working, but that the State Department had, generally speaking, been assisting the agitation inside the Ukraine and other places. And I'll tell you something, I don't have the date in front of me, but one time on my show, I don't know when it was, but one time on my show, I had a whole bunch of, it was a show I think dedicated to Soros, but I laid out all of these organizations that he has, that he funds, and then the organizations fund other organizations. It's a giant, giant spider web. And within all of that, a good friend of mine who is the most amazing forensic researcher, or cyber researcher, she dug in and dug in and dug in. And she actually called me to say, 3 years ago, you do realize that the State Department is funding George Soros-based organizations, NGOs. To which I said, I don't think so. I don't think they'd really do that. But they have been, and they are. And this is what the left is trying so hard to keep out of the understanding of the American people, to keep out of the headlines, to keep Americans from recognizing it's not really a question of whether Trump said something that you could, orchestrate or manipulate into a quid pro quo or into bribery in a conversation with Zelensky. It is the entire nefarious, ongoing effort of the State Department to fund the agitation deliberately being created by George Soros to bring about a world in which Soros' view of the world, how government should function, how, who should be in charge, and to just crush, to quell the voices of liberty, the voices of people who want self-government, the voices of liberty who do not want to live under socialism. This is the effort of George Soros. Everyone, paying attention realizes he's an evil actor, but most of America didn't realize the State Department was funding much of it. So on my website, americacanwetalk.org, I urge you to go there on the homepage under shows, scroll down, list of links. There is a link to the entire Glenn Beck video, because he's got pictures and copies of emails. It's 2 hours long. I can't do it here. I will say you can skip about the first hour at least. It's a lot of lead up in case you want, the history of the Council on Foreign Relations and Woodrow Wilson and FDR, which is relevant but not really relevant to where we are today. You can start about an hour in. It's still an hour to listen to, but full of data, important to understand. This is really what is driving the Democrats so completely crazy. And it's a kind of an interesting parallel I wanted to mention to you. You realize that we had the FBI and DOJ coup, the Russia-Trump collusion hoax. We had the coup inside the FBI and DOJ. And now what we have is Attorney General Barr and U.S. Attorney Durham looking into, trying to get to the bottom of it, trying to figure out how in the world did this loopy, false, hoax allegation that Trump colluded with the Russians, how did that ever get started? That's what Durham is looking into. That's what U.S. Attorney Durham is going to report on, hopefully pretty darn soon. We can't wait much longer, but hopefully soon. Well, the same way the Democrats are trying to hurry this impeachment through the House and into the Senate, because they don't want the American people starting to question their hysteria over an obviously innocuous phone call between Trump and Zelensky. They want to get this impeachment done and off their desk. They don't want the American people asking, how do we get here? The Democrats wanted to hide the roots, the core beginning of the Russia-Trump collusion, and they also want to hide from the American people the beginnings of the genesis of the Trump-Ukraine collusion thing. One last little point in this story, and I could go on. There's so many pieces to tell you, but one last point to make is, is an odd thing. President Trump was accused of having colluded with the Russians and having inexplicable sympathy for Putin and being too friendly toward Putin. But stop and think about this. When the Ukrainians were asking for weapons to help them defend them against the Russians, Obama, as we talked about last week someday on the show, Obama sent them blankets. Trump sent them weapons. President Trump actually helped the Ukraine prepare to defend itself against against Russia and Putin's aggression toward the Ukraine. Trump is helping the Ukrainians protect themselves from the Russians, something Obama would not do. For people still trying to claim, well, there's something weird about Trump and Putin, no way. I mean, Trump has been more ardent, stronger, more insistent on protecting countries from Russia's aggression and from preventing Russia from having any kind of control over the flow of energy, control over oil. Trump has been stronger standing up against the Russian aggression than President Obama ever was.